Well, hey there, everyone. It's Kristi. It's time for the monthly Patreon patron hangout. And this month we have Matthew, and he's a solo star. He's co-hosting with me. And we're going to be covering some stories that I would have been doing for facepalm moments of the week, but we're going to look at them one by one. And even further, he goes, "Gah." So that was... That was a little random joke for any people in Canada who might be over the age of 35 might like remember that episode, but otherwise it's just a random thought in my head. Yeah, facepalm moments of the week. We have 5 stories lined up for chatting about this week. And I'll go ahead and do the whole share the screen as I do. By the way, for those of you who are joining us, you'll notice that this wasn't live. And that is because I am trying to deal with the audio issue. And actually, Matthew and I had a nice chat before we went on air about what I do and don't have control over in the YouTube world. And the part of that is how much bit information I have. So we're trying to establish some baselines here of what's the minimum that can be done with good, consistent audio, and then I'll, as a scientist, add things in the future and see if we can get a stable, good audio quality. And that's why it wasn't broadcast live. The second reason it wasn't broadcast live is because, I don't know if it's because I'm in Germany, but even when I click on the option for having live chats in the comments while the video is live, people keep asking me where the comments are, and I really don't know. So I'm not sure if it's a geography thing or just some other problem I'm having. But since the comment section wasn't working where people could come in and chat about the chat, it seems sort of not worth it to have it live, so we can put it up at any time. So that's what we've decided to do. So the first story that we're going to cover today is this recent news that happened in the States. And we've got 2 stories about the States and then 3 international stories from places not being the United States, I should say. Otherwise, it's like America and everywhere else. No, that's not true. We have America and other places around the world. There we go. This is my European sensitivities coming out. We've got the story here about Tennessee's governor vetoing a bill that would have made the Bible the official state book. And as a quick summary, the governor of Tennessee vetoed the measure to make the Bible Tennessee's state book. The critics say the bill isn't constitutional, and they have a 2-pronged argument. So there's a constitutional argument, which I think is the legally correct one, but they have a second argument that seems to me to be more directed at addressing the critics from the Christian community who would criticize him on the basis of religion, to say that he should have made this bill law instead of vetoing it. And that argument that the governor's making is that by making it a state symbol, it equates it to other state symbols that are like the Tennessee walking horse or the cave salamander. And he says the bill trivializes the Bible, which I believe is a sacred text. In the letter, Bill Hassan, says that the founders recognized that when the church and state were combined, it was the church that suffered in the long run. And then there was also expectation that the Republican-dominated legislature will most likely override his veto. And we'll just keep a legal eye on what happens on that. And I'll just see, let's say, and this is also, I thought, very, very interesting, this last paragraph. In terms of as we reported when both houses of the legislature approved the measure this month, the bill's backers say they want to recognize the Bible's role as a record of family history. They also cite the importance of the Bible publishers in Nashville, where Thomas Nelson, Gideon's International, and United Methodist Publishing House account for a multi-million-dollar industry. So not only is this sort of, dealing with the Christian community, but it's also, in some ways, they're saying it's a nod to the big money makers and people who are making all of this $1 million selling Bibles is another justification.
That's interesting to me. I'd say I take the opposite tack that the governor took, which is, aren't most state items something that is unique or peculiar to the state, or at least something the state's known for? He talks about the Tennessee walking horse. We as a nation, we have the bald eagle and things like that. You have the Bible in every state and in every Christian country. How does that unique to Tennessee?
That's true. That's almost like saying, it was our book, like somebody from Tennessee wrote it.
I'm sure there are a lot of Jews who want to dispute that one.
I think so.
So I just don't understand it. It's like making this we're a Christian statement at the expense of trying to, break the separation between church and state here. Because, if any other religious book were chosen, whether it be a Jewish book, a Muslim book, a Buddhist book, a Shinto book, how would that have gone over in the state legislature?
Precisely. And this is a perfect example of that sort of Christian privilege where the Christians don't see why would anyone have a problem with the Bible being the state book? Because I don't have a problem with it. And then that sort of bubble of, wait a minute, put the shoe on the other foot, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's not that big a step to take.
I don't care what state book they have. It's just, I think it's a stupid idea. I think if there was some I think if we were to look back at some famous Tennessee writers, they would be annoyed that something written 2,000 years ago was picked over one of their works for a state book.
Good point. And that was, I think that's a really cogent point that wasn't covered in the articles and hasn't been brought up, in the quotes or anything. And it goes right to, what is the point of a state symbol if not to represent something about that state? Yeah, exactly. So excellent. I'm ready to move on if you are.
Go right ahead.
The next one is a pretty saucy topic, and I'm going to try to not laugh the whole time while I read it, but I might not be able to. From Huffington Post, Christian author Mack says female masturbation is, quote, direct path to Satan. He also warns that dildos are used in demonic sex rituals. So a Christian author is warning women that masturbation is a direct path to Satan. He wrote in his on Facebook that too many Christian women are losing their salvation because they masturbate. So here is what he wrote on Facebook. Quote, many of you who are reading this have sex toys in your possession right now. And whether you want to accept it as a fact or not, those sex toys, are an open portal between...
See, I don't have this problem. I have a mute button over here.
Right, you're laughing out loud. I have to read this. Between the demonic realm and your own life. So long as you have those sex toys in your home, you will have a doorway. That can allow demons to not only access your life at will, but to torment you, hinder and destroy certain parts of your life as relates to sex and your relationships. It gets better. He goes on. In a post, this is from an excerpt of a book called Hedonism, Destroying Demonic Sexual Strongholds, he warned. There are such things as sex demons, and the danger in masturbating is that one could inadvertently summon a sex demon to attach itself to you through the act of masturbating. And once the demon attaches, it is very difficult to get it to leave. It will drive you to masturbate, even when you don't want to. You will be hit with urges to play with yourself so powerful that only an orgasm will allow you some temporary relief. Wow. I have to say, let's say, I've been an adult, sexually functioning person, and I don't think I've ever had urges to play with myself so powerful that it distracts me from my work. And what is just, obviously he's just talking utter crap and trying to scare people here. So we can talk a little bit about that, and then we can talk about the gender nature of the discourse as well.
I've heard similar arguments for completely different things. One thing I'll reveal is that I grew up in a rather fundamentalist Christian household, and one of the things we had been taught it was, you can end up acquiring items that could have demonic influence. The example that was always made is, you're not sure what you're going to get at, say, a flea market or a yard sale, and if you bring these items into your home, they might have a demonic influence on your home and you won't be able to sleep or anything else like this. Now, granted, no one ever brought sex into these conversations, but I can see the source where this author is coming from, because I've lived with it, and now I can make fun of this. There's a website I post on frequently, and that is constantly, that's one of the tropes that's constantly made fun of, is this idea that you pick up a trinket at a yard sale and it could, you know, bring demons into your home, and that you may need your spiritual leaders to come into the house and find them and remove them. And you can't just remove them. You can't just throw them away. You have to take them out back and burn them or destroy them and other things like that, because you certainly wouldn't want to pass on this demon to someone else. I've never heard of a group of people so scared of a simple garage sale in my life. So it's the same idea. It's just now they just throw in sex into it to make it even more, what's the word I'm looking for? Just worse somehow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on here. One is this sort of notion that there's magic in the world, that there is a sort of a magical realm that you can't see, but somehow still can impact your life and touch you and has a causal mechanism, you know, that's out to destroy you. And that fear element being put into you know, your mind, so that when things go wrong, you're sort of self-correcting and returning to Jesus and being more dependent on God to protect you from things that are magic. Then there's also, yeah, the whole issue about sex and sexuality, and the fact that if you have normal hormones, if you're, you know, a child who is healthy and in sort of the optimal ways of having hormones during puberty, then you are going to have urges, because that is what is part of what we do in order to survive as a species, is to have sex. So by pathologizing sexual desire, it does create a disconnect between your biological operations and the way that you perceive yourself. Because if every time you feel a sexual urge, you think that that's a demonic attack, that's clearly going to create a pathological relationship between you and your own sexuality, because you're going to be at war with yourself over something for which you have no control. It would be like saying that being hungry was a sin, or no, eating was a sin, and being hungry was the natural state of things. So the way that they also discount biology and the role of biology, and giving people sensible advice about their sexual urges, and instead scaring them, and that leads to repression or denial or other things that aren't healthy, because these things will come out. And I don't no, but you know, these are natural processes, and not acknowledging that, I think, is a big problem. And then there's the whole gendered notion of it, that about the way that women's sexuality is in particular not only a problem for women, but women being sexual beings is the reason why men are sinful in some misogynistic approaches in Christian writings, definitely, for sure. So I don't know if you want to pick up on one, two, or all three of those.
Well, I was just still thinking about my thought there. Yeah, it's the idea, and I'm trying to remember, there's someone who had a quote that says, when you make normal things a sin, you turn everyone into sinners. And I think that's what's happening here, especially when you hear about sexuality in the Christian church. It's particularly the fundamental or evangelical Christian churches, the ones that say no sex before marriage. You can't even touch yourself before marriage. I hear stories about, you know, people are never supposed to be alone because, you know, the temptations might grab them at any point in time. So it's like, we're human. We have to deal with being human. I'm not sure who it was in the past that decided that being human wasn't good enough. So it's, yeah. how do you live like this?
Yes. And also this idea too, you know, insofar as, and I obviously did not grow up as a boy, but from my understanding, when puberty hits and you get nocturnal emissions, this is a biological way to release fluids, you know, to process some of the hormones that are driving through your body. And that is not something that a lot of women experience. So it seems to, you know, again, this idea of masturbation being sinful, it tends to weigh, it's judged more harshly in girls, because even, you know, through like a nocturnal emission, I don't, unless they were saying those are sinful too, I think that, you know, there would be some equivalence, but I think there's a recognition that you can't control your dreams, unless maybe they think demons are entering your dreams and having you experience this physical pleasure. But yeah, the way that female sexuality, especially the Madonna whore complex of women are supposed to be mothers and wives, which involves sex and reproduction, but at the same time, their sexuality is, you know, very sinful, and they shouldn't have sexual urges to, you know, have those children. It's an unworkable contradictory set of values that women are supposed to live up to at the same time.
Yeah, I can't imagine having to do that. Now, I did grow up as a teenage boy, so I remember that time of life, and it's just like having to deal with the physical urges at the same time hearing these cues from the pulpit that's like, you can't do this, this is wrong, you bring a tear to God's eye, things like that. It really messes with your psyche, knowing that I can't be a good person and things like that. So it's really just an amazing way to destroy someone's self-worth, I think. And it's just one of the many ways that Christian pastors tend to do that.
Yeah, to try to control. And again, there's a dependency there. If your body is working against you, then your only salvation is the church, right?
Yeah, I've heard that before. Have Jesus come into your heart, or pray to God daily. And one of the things I've heard is particularly about masturbation. Now that I just remembered it, it's like when you feel the urge, make sure to pray the feeling away from you. It's like, wow, does that really work for anyone?
Yeah, it's about as effective as praying away the gay. In other words, yeah, not at all, because it's wishful thinking. It's nothing to do with reality. And yeah, so there's I know Richard Dawkins has been criticized for many things, but one of the things that he has said that he's received flack for is the idea of linking religious indoctrination with child abuse, because it can be too broad. There are liberal churches, and not everything is terrible, but I don't think because some places it's not an issue, that we shouldn't have a serious discussion about what kids are psychologically enduring, as you did and as I did as growing up Catholic, that this self-loathing based on your sexuality, while still trying to balance out the urges that are going to keep the species going, and how unhealthy that mentality is. And I see Pope Francis, for instance, making some movements, not obviously massive steps into the 21st century, but trying to accommodate things. But there's still a lot of really repressive theologies out there. And because it seems, it's a sort of private issue of private belief, that it's not as open for discussion as, say, no platforming at university campuses. Everyone gets to have an opinion on whether or not someone gets disinvited to speak from a conference, but we don't get to have an opinion about the mental health issues that might be coming up from children who are being made to feel shamed about their bodies, and the problems they have later on, maybe because of that. So, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, I saw Catholicism from the outside growing up, and in particular dealing with a religion that looked down on the Catholic Church. And, they would say things about how, they don't allow their priests to marry. That's against human nature. But at the same time, just about every Christian church says something about human sexuality that is probably just as dangerous. So, pot calling kettle black there, but every one of them has some issue, because they're looking at they're looking at morals from a 2,000-year-old perspective that really doesn't have much say in what we're doing today.
And that's really key, and I'm really glad you brought it up, because you're right. When the Christian theology was initially formed, people who were thought leaders like Paul did not expect the world to exist beyond his lifetime. And so he was all about giving up anything in this world, giving up your, don't be attached to your wealth, don't be, attached to your sexuality, because if you're going to get focused on that, you're not going to keep focused on what's important. And when Jesus comes, you're not going to be ready, kind of thing. So, this going back, there were big debates within the early Christian community, and Professor Bart Ehrman discusses this. There was a line of Christian thought that didn't succeed, but that held that everyone should be chaste. And there is a non-canonical gospel about a woman who was supposed to be married, and then she hears Paul preach and then decides to try to reject her husband, and it creates all this drama, and eventually I think she's martyred and goes to heaven because she stayed a pure virgin. And this non-canonical gospel was circulated among these early Christian people who thought that you had to literally just reject everything of the body and focus on the spiritual. And so Christianity from the very beginning has always had a very difficult sort of approach to the worldly, because it wants to put everything in this world down with the apocalyptic view of Jesus, which is that this world is tainted and it's not like in the hands of Satan, but it's ruled by the corrupt, and there isn't justice here, but God's going to come soon and fix society, and then the poor will be elevated and the just will be raised and the naughty will be spanked and everything will be good again. But the problem was that, Jesus didn't come. And now 2,000 years later, we're still left with this sort of self-loathing of the body mentality.
And 2,000 years later, people are still looking for Jesus to come to fix all the problems. It's like, and I can't help for my non-religiosity to come out in this statement, but it's like, we have problems today that need to be fixed. And looking to another life doesn't fix the problems we have today.
Precisely. Yeah. You can't just, pray away climate change. You actually have to do something about it.
First, you have to believe it exists. Which
important first step.
Which reminds me of another point. And I don't remember who made this point. It might have been you in a recent video about how a lot of the times people's morality is the same. It's their beliefs that are different. So for someone who believes that there is a Christ-granted life after this one, their morality appears different because they're looking toward that rather than what's going on right now. Or for someone who doesn't believe climate change is real, they will act in a way that's congruent with that thought, but their morality is still the same, but they're just working on different things.
I didn't say that, but credit to whoever did.
I'll have to find that.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Yeah, way to think about it.
Well, I think the illustration that was given was it was actually about the Salem witch trials, because they believed in witches and they believed witches existed in their town. Therefore, they were compelled to do the things they did because of that belief. We don't believe they're witches. We don't believe they're witches at our own city. Therefore, we're not going out drowning people based on that belief.
Yes. And this is why I've made a very conscious effort, about 7 or 8 years ago, to stop saying I believe in evolution or I believe in climate change. And I always try to be mindful and say I accept the evidence that climate change exists. I accept the overwhelming evidence that the theory of evolution is the best explanation for the data we have, because I'm trying to move away from a belief statement into an evidence-based statement, saying I'm convinced by the evidence that this is a good description. This theory of evolution is a good description for what we observe in reality. And it's like my one little person crusade. Oh, it's kind of ironic because crusades a religious term.
Yes.
Get it?
Yes.
I'm funny, damn it. So that, for me, that linguistic shift is very important to clarify my epistemology, how I take knowledge in. And I think that if we talked about evidence, and of course as an academic I would think this, but as we talked about evidence rather than beliefs, then it would be less about opinion and more about facts.
Correct. And to circle back to the article, where is this evidence for this demon influence? They talk about empowering demonic entities. First, show me where their influence is. Just give me some clue that they've had an influence on our lives here in the 21st century.
Yes, precisely. Don't start with the assumption that demons exist and then use it to explain things you observe in your life. You have to test that theory. You have to show a causal mechanism. Precisely.
I think I wrote something earlier this week about Occam's razor. Use it.
Yes, it's there. It's free.
And the interesting thing is I was looking up Occam's razor because of a post I was writing, and I found someone said the opposite of Occam's razor is Arkham's razor, as in Arkham Asylum. Yeah. And that's when, if you hear hoofbeats, think zebras.
Right, it's the Joker's way of roundabout thinking of things. Right?
Correct. So so now you have a new term. You could call it Arkham's razor when people go to the absurd end of where the evidence would lead them, as opposed to the simple, keep it simple end of the evidence.
This is one of the things that's a nice dichotomy, because it's one of my objections to the mythical Jesus narrative. is that it's so much more complicated than just thinking he was a real dude who died and his friends talked about him and other people wrote exaggerations. But that's for a few weeks down the line.
All right.
You ready to move to the next story?
Let's go on.
Right. So this is a story out of the UK, because I noticed that sometimes often my stories are US centered and focused and biased. And that's because there's a lot going on in the US, but I'm trying to be more mindful of my American privilege and make sure that I produce content of a wider variety, not only for other viewers, but also for the majority of Americans who watch. They might not be aware of struggles that atheists or secular people are facing in other countries. And so this is a good opportunity to introduce new information.
Well, I think far too many people in this country need to know more about the world. Now, granted, I doubt that describes your audience, but I wish more people knew about the world.
Yeah, we'll put content out there and plant seeds, and some things will grow, right? Some new information.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. This was a story I wanted to raise because, and actually the state story on Denmark as well. I know that most atheists in Europe would say they don't generally have a problem in their daily lives, and that's true, but that doesn't mean that we don't need atheism in the West. Like we don't need feminism in the West. If you think that all of the big fights over atheism in Europe have been fought in one, well, that's also not how it is. It's a different sort of situation with different incidents and different issues, but we still have, even in Europe, more room to grow to fully realize the idea of a secular government for people. And this is just covering a case in the UK where a Pentecostal Christian was accused of harassing and bullying a junior colleague, and she had been dismissed and had appealed her dismissal, and the employment tribunal ruled against her. She had been found guilty of bullying a junior colleague at work with 3 charges, and then she again took it to the tribunal. What she was originally the complaint originally alleged was that she had sent out a number of invitations to a Muslim colleague, to persistent and unwanted invitations to attend her Pentecostal church, with frequent phone calls and texts sent about it outside of work hours. And the employee finally had to block her from their personal mobile phone to avoid further invites to religious events. She also had a history of advancing the influence on her Christian Revival church at the mental health unit where she worked, and she pushed to have that Christian Revival church's services at the hospital, and complaints soon began to arrive about the group pressuring medical staff to participate in religious worship. So this was a case where the state was basically saying, or the decision of the tribunal was that, yes, she had gone too far. She was not allowed, in terms of her right to religious freedom, to badger and bully, or people weren't allowed to harass you to attend your religion or convert. And this was basically, it was a good decision. It demonstrates again that there are lines between private belief and public actions in the workplace, where everything is meant to be fair and equal, and everyone is supposed to feel like a member of that workforce without feeling pressure to attend or convert to a certain religious denominations, services, or beliefs.
I look at this story and I see nothing really about religious freedom in it, because I don't care if you're trying to get me to join your bowling league. If you're doing this to me, I will tell my supervisor. Because, do the substitute anything but a Christian congregation in this, and you see how absurd her behavior really was. I don't care if she was trying to, get the services of the local choir, or the services of, a farm, or anything like that. The method she was using was inappropriate for her workplace. It was inappropriate for her life. So that's what was wrong. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was promoting her church. Now, for me, promoting her church obviously would have, rubbed me the wrong way, but it doesn't change the fact that when she was told no, she kept going, and that was the problem.
Exactly. And there's also an issue here about the power dynamic, that the person that she was targeting was a junior colleague. And so this sort of disproportionate position of power that you then, use, whether it's, as you point out, religion, or if you're like a Newcastle fan trying to bully a Sunderland fan into becoming a Newcastle fan, whatever it is, your workplace is not a place where you need to go in, and you should not, no one should go into the workplace feeling like they're going to be harassed by someone because of an opinion they hold or anything else. Whether it was, whatever the content of it, it's not appropriate for the workplace in any situation. Yep, still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. I think that's pretty much it on this one. I mean, basically.
It seems cut and dry to me that she's trying to use, religious persecution, but it's not religious persecution. She was just pissing off one of her employees.
Yes. And when people ask, what is Christian privilege? I think we can point to the story about, trying to get the Bible passed, thinking that somehow this is not, nobody would object to it because everybody's a Christian, or everybody who counts is a Christian. And another thing of people who think that because they have a religious belief that entitles them to speak to other people at any time about that belief. These are, I think, in some ways, I don't want to say they're more conscious forms of privilege, but it's a kind of privilege that comes with an assumption that you're right. I think, white privilege or male privilege, a lot of that privilege is unconscious. You don't know you're experiencing it. I don't, when I was driving in the States, I didn't think about the fact that I wasn't worried about the police other than when I was speeding a little bit, because I was just oblivious to it. But I don't have to live my life worrying about the police as a white woman in Wisconsin when I go to Milwaukee or when I go to Chicago. But I'm not aware of it. Here, there is that sort of decision to step up and try to convince somebody else because of your own rightness and the lack of self-awareness about that, or to push the Bible down the throats of an entire state regardless of the beliefs of other people. I think it takes a certain extra level of some kind of psychological process there than just a typical description of privilege.
Some level of self-delusion, like I said, having grown up the way I did, we believe that we were right. That there's a great comic, and it shows someone up at a chalkboard, and he has this tree diagram, this nice taxonomy, and he has one of the nodes circled, and it says, "This is where we got the Bible right." And you look at it compared to everything else, there are thousands of sects of Christianity. And for me to think that mine was the right one for some crazy reason is, the height of hubris. And so just because that if we just coalesce that to the major categories of religion, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Eastern religions, even to say that, for any religion a person is, half the world thinks you're wrong. I don't care what religion you are, half the world thinks you wrong.
Yes. And also just if you live in a bubble where everyone is like you, there's, I think, also a sense of righteousness that goes, and that it's kind of along all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And Christians, some Christians, not all Christians, but Christians who would want to link the Bible to the Constitution think that they're a bit more American, I think, than other people. They're a bit more real Americans. It's like the picture that Rachel Maddow showed on her TV show, I'm going to do a video about feminist critique, and it was the governor of a state signing the Bring Your Guns to Churches bill. And in the signing, they had a picture of Reagan, and he had a gun on the Bible on his desk while he was signing the bill. And all of these things just smack of a kind of sense of, I'm what a true American is, and I am the metric by which all other Americanness is evaluated. I don't know what you think about that.
Like I said, I lived it. I know what I was like before that, and I was a righteous asshole, to put it bluntly. So I am trying to trying to be forgiven for what I've done back then. So I know what it's like, and I sometimes know what goes through these people's minds, and I try to give them a little bit of slack, but still, it's the fact that they're in the majority, at least here in the area where I live, where I grew up. But it's like sometimes you need to open your mind. When you said in the bubble, I always think of Bill Maher used to do that skit about in the bubble, and showing stupid things our politicians have done because they're in their own sounding chambers.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Let's move on.
This one I'm going to have to read a bit more precisely because it's not a topic I'm as familiar with as, say, the Tennessee governor and how governors can veto a piece of legislation. So if you'll bear with me while I read this out. Muslim women in India are campaigning to ban triple talaq, the legally recognized way in which a Muslim man can unilaterally divorce his wife, and they have taken their case to India's Supreme Court. Apparently, India recognizes Muslim personal law for its 170 million Muslim citizens, effectively putting into legal force elements of Sharia law, but many of the laws which govern this area of life are uncodified, leading to widespread abuse. This includes the instant verbal divorce in which a man can immediately divorce his wife simply by saying talaq 3 times, which campaigners claim has no basis in the Quran. And one woman faced domestic abuse from her husband and was made to go through 6 abortions during their marriage. Finally, her husband divorced her with a letter stating talaq 3 times, bringing their 15-year marriage to the end. But she said that ever since she received the letter, she's not been allowed to see her children. And this case is going to be taken up by the Indian Supreme Court to consider whether or not this practice is unconstitutional. I'm just very quickly, for a sort of even-handed treatment of this, I'm going to quote here. This is from Zaika Sonman, co-founder of the Indian Muslim Women's Movement, saying that ordinary Muslim women have suffered too long, and they demand immediate stopping of this practice. They are knocking at the doors of courts seeking help in making this long overdue correction. She added that the practice is not legal in Muslim countries worldwide. Excuse me. So, I think that there's a lot of what Sharia law is and how it works and where it can work is a topic that I don't feel very comfortable getting into just because I don't know a whole lot about it. But what raised this to me was this attempt by women to use the power of the secular state to protect them from a religious practice, which may or may not be justified in Islam, but is currently being practiced with religious justification and really having a horrible impact on their lives.
Well, I see this as just a blatant example of how certain groups in this world don't think of women as people.
Yeah.
For a man to be able to divorce his wife unilaterally in just such a simple way, and for a woman to have no recourse or not even to be able to do the same thing, is proof that to these people, women aren't people, because they would have the same rights that they were. They've created a definition of human that involves being male, and that's I don't know how to fix that problem.
Yeah, I think I think it's inherent in the text. And as a side note, on something I'm slightly more comfortable talking about, I've said before, I don't think it's possible to be a Christian feminist. I think you can be a Christian and you can be a feminist, but you can't be a Christian feminist because the core text of your beliefs say that women are inferior to men. And so you can't fix the problems of women's disadvantage with a book that tells you that women aren't equal to men. It seems really simple to me. You have to go outside the Bible, and in which case you're just a Christian who's a feminist, but you're not. Your feminism doesn't come from your Christianity.
Especially when it's not just the Old Testament that's doing that. You have the writings of Peter and Paul that specifically state, I know there's a verse somewhere, don't ask me where, that says, the women aren't to speak in the congregation. If they have a question, they're supposed to ask their husbands. And then you have that verse that talks about how the head of the Christ is God, the head of man is Christ, the head of the woman is man. They've put a hierarchy to it. It's blatantly there in black and white in the original text. How can you not say that the Bible isn't this 2,000-year-old highly misogynistic book? It's one of those things, when that's 2,000 years old. We can look back 200 years ago when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, when they said all men are created equal, but they still had slaves. This is almost the same idea right here, that we need all humans need to be people at this point. And that's a personality that needs to be changed at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And the complete lack, the owning a person while saying that everyone is free. Yeah, it's hard for us to believe how that cognitive dissonance worked. But I'm going to do amateur Bible scholar geek out here, because the authorship of the Bible text and things is something that I boned up on a lot and know a lot. So the first thing that you quoted was about women keeping silent was from Timothy. And Timothy and Titus, the pastorals, are considered by most, sort of like, the scholars who aren't fundamentalist Christians, to be pseudepigrapha, or forgeries. What most scholars now conclude when you look at the writing styles of the pastoral letters compared to what people would agree are the authentic letters of Paul, there are differences in grammar, and also differences in theology, and differences in concern about the way the church was being organized that demonstrated could not have been written in Paul's time. And so I don't want to stain the author Paul with the misogyny of Timothy. Timothy obviously put that in there, that women should be silent and these things, and because women were talking. He wouldn't have had to put it in if it wasn't a problem. So to me it shows, if anything, was that women's roles in the church became less free over time as the church grew in stature and power, and men saw it as a way to, have a status in their societies. And so in that case, it became in their interest to take control over who could say what. And that's a personal speculation, but I think it's one based in evidence. But on your other quote about the head of Christ is God, and the head of man is Jesus, and the head of man is woman, that very certainly does come from Paul, and it does show that hierarchy. I also think it shows from, again, something I would argue about Paul's theology from Did Jesus Exist, is that he saw Jesus as subordinate, not co-equal to or a part of God, but as a subordinate. And then men were subordinate to the sort of super angel, so he must, So there's issues of women's suppression in Christianity that goes right back to the text, and it comes from quite a lot of different sources. And on that, I'll stop talking about the authorship of some of the letters of the New Testament.
Well, I do appreciate the correction on that one. Of course, when I talk, I tend to just rattle off what I remember as a kid, so it tends to be all the wrong stuff that we were taught when I was a kid. So yeah,
no. I mean, that's a common thing that you hear a lot, and so unless you kind of dug deep into it, like your nerdy reasons for me, you would be perfectly reasonable in concluding that those all came from Paul, because of the way, obviously, fundamentalist Christians attribute it to Paul, and a lot of people who talk about the misogyny in the Bible don't know that that wasn't written by Paul, or they don't mention it. So it's one of those things that I'm trying to put out there and kind of clear up, and you gave me a great opportunity to do that.
Well, thank you. I could just remember as a child, the copy of the Bible I had a chart in the back that had, here's the Bible book, here's when it was written, here's where it was written, here's the author. And having now in the past few years actually looked into these things and knowing that that chart is massively wrong. And also a plug for the guys over at the Bible Reloaded. I love how they say most of this stuff's been retconned after the fact.
Yes.
Particularly the Old Testament. But yeah, there's stuff, insertions, to make it look like the prophecies actually came true, when really, something like the book of Daniel was written after all that stuff really happened. That's why they know it happened the way it did. So
that's how they know how it ended, because it happened. I heard it happened. So, but yeah, getting back to this case, the point here was really the raising the issue that a secular government is one that can protect people from religious exploitation or abuse or religious practices that are harmful. Because if the woman who's sending this case up through the court system was doing it within a religious court, obviously she wouldn't get anywhere. So yeah, in this case we're talking about Sharia law and Muslim women's rights, but really it could be applied to any situation, any person who's living under a religious situation that's exploitative. If you don't have recourse to secular laws, then you really don't have sort of a recourse. And then just quickly, part two, I mean, I definitely am of the opinion, I share the same view of this with the skeptic feminist, that the best thing that we can do to improve the problems identified in Islam is to support Muslims who are interested in modernizing, who want to bring Islam into the 21st century, make it compatible with modern day life. Just like Christianity had to have its own reformation, I think Islam is probably, it's like 900 years now, right? And that's kind of, Christian church went from about 400 until, when did Luther write? In the 1500s. So again, kind of like 900 years. So, you know, there's maybe a something about being around for a century that's time for a big shift in reevaluating the religion. And as an outside person, I obviously can't, I'm not going to be convincing to somebody who is a believing Muslim as an atheist. But if I can support moderate Muslims whose views I agree with in terms of how Muslims can live and do live, being in Germany, I know I have many friends who are Muslim who have, you know, just integrate to modern, you're going to say Western life, not modern life, but Western life very easily, and putting the focus there. I think that's how the best thing I can do to help things move ahead.
And I've noticed an increasing need for the secular courts. I've been following stories out of the various locations about the child abuse scandals in various religions. Particularly recently, there was a whole commission set up in Australia that was looking at several denominations. And it's not the churches that are fixing the problem. It's the secular courts that are opening this can of worms and trying to help the people involved because the churches won't do it.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so really the only time you can really have religious freedom is with a secular government that treats everybody the same.
Correct.
And then the last story, kind of ending on a high note, or a, you know, more positive thing, because that one was kind of a downer, is this story that I found, again, on the National Secular Society. They're awesome. You should check them out. They do great news summaries. But the Danish Atheist Society launched an advertising campaign on buses to show Danish citizens how to withdraw from the Church of Denmark to avoid being taxed, the church tax that they normally get. All baptized Danes are automatically made members of the church, making them liable for the tax. Apparently, though, only 2.4% of these members attend regularly, according to Christian Today. So the Danish Atheist Society created not only a bus campaign, but also the documentation. They put it up on their website in order to help people withdraw and avoid having that tax put on their income. So far, around 3,000 people have used the website to withdraw from the church, and that's going to save them, in terms of pounds, about 14,200 pounds a year, which is probably, it's about I'm thinking of the euro. Let's say $20,000, I think is a good guesstimate of dollars to pounds right now over the course of their lifetime. But apparently the loss of the tax funds from those 3,000 members is equivalent to nearly $1 million in lost revenues for the church over their lifetimes, I guess, when you add it all up. So the church apparently has criticized the Danish Atheist Society. The dean of the diocese of Viborg said, I quote, "I have nothing against campaigns that encourage discussions about faith, but providing tools for withdrawals, such as Atheist Society's website is, for me, is wrong and ill-mannered," unquote. So it's fine for us to talk about, you know, we should be a secular state, but don't actually stop the funding, the money that's coming in by taxing people who don't even attend the church. And this is one of the reasons that you can see the difference in the way that Europeans have this weird thing where a lot of times religion is still part of the official government, even though the population isn't religious. Whereas in the US, it's the government that isn't officially religious, although more people from the outside are trying to make it religious. And that's, I think for Americans, might be kind of a weird thing to get your head around. Having your taxes taken out to pay for a church, you know, from your paycheck every week.
I heard about this somewhere in the last week or so. I was just trying to find more information, looking under the Wikipedia article on the church tax. Take this with a grain of salt, obviously. It says, members of the National Church of Denmark pay a church tax which varies between municipalities, but can be as large as 1.51%. The tax is generally in the vicinity of 1% of taxable income. The tax doesn't cover the entire budget of the church. an additional 13% is paid by the government.
Yeah.
This means even people who are not members of the church finance the church through taxes, which would not go over well in the United States.
No.
Considering that this article also covers Finland, Germany, Austria, Croatia, shows that, as you say, that it's obviously common over there. But again, what's the percentage of the nons in Denmark? You know, they say what, nearly almost a quarter of the people in the United States. What is it in Denmark?
Yeah, it doesn't have it in this article, and I would hate to speculate in the absence of reliable evidence. So I'm just going to stay stum on that one. But yeah, it is when I started my employment here in Germany, and I was asked what my religious affiliation was, and the person who was helping me said, oh, it's for the tax, for your church tax. If you declare you're Christian, it'll go to, Catholic or Protestant church. And I was like, I don't want to pay any money to a church. I declare atheist. And it was absolutely fine, and the person behind the desk didn't even bat an eye. But it was, when I go through and I do my German taxes every year, there's a bit on there where, if you've had the money taken out from the church tax in your pay, you're meant to, put it on the line and report what it was or include it or something. So yeah, it was as an American, that was a very interesting step for me to kind of have to do. I'd never had to do that before. And when I was in the UK, you don't really file taxes the way you do in Germany and the US. It's sort of like sending in this paperwork every year unless you have a small business. So I had no way of kind of knowing what my tax was there. I just sort of paid it and hoped for the best, really. But yeah, it's just a very different system. And in that weird thing about Americans are so religious, but the state not being so religious, and being in the inverse in a lot of countries in Europe.
I was just trying to find an article about it. I found the Pew Forum article from 2012, The Global Religious Landscape, where Christians are 31.5%, Muslims are 23.2%, and unaffiliated, this is worldwide statistics, are 16.3%. So it's a growing margins. It's the third largest group out of these categories, the next being Hindus at 15%, Buddhists at 7%. So it's a sizable number. I don't know what it is in Denmark. But still, that's a lot of people whose hard-earned money that they made is being taken in taxes and then given to an organization they have no reason to support. Yeah,
agreed. Yeah. And I think that this is why this sort of activism in Europe is important, because there are these vestiges that people don't necessarily question, that's been around, that's sort of that blindness. Oh yeah, it's 1% in my, not really religious, but it's just the church tax. I'm not going to go through the bother of filling out the form for the 1% of my income. But really, it's more about the principle of the thing. And as you say, in terms of representation, it doesn't make sense that an entire country as an American, obviously, we have this perspective that my taxes shouldn't be going to fund a religious institution, because it doesn't provide public services in the way that sort of when I pay a road tax or gas tax, it should ultimately, one would hope, end up making sure that the roads are in fit condition to run. And yeah, so this is just a little highlighting the differences between the European problems, that is the kind of European activism, shall we say, and American activism on issues of secularism and atheism. So, and hey, I've run out of things to say on that topic anyway.
Like I said, I was just still looking up things here. I've trying to find actual numbers when I make a statement, but something about Christianity is a predominant religion in Denmark with 80% of the Danish population. But then again, we saw that only 2.4% only attend.
Yes.
They got 3% Islam and 2% other groups. So does it have a category here for non-affiliated, which I think is something? Oh, wait a minute. There is actually
the European Social Survey. I work in an archive where we have a lot of surveys that are deposited there, so I'm a little bit familiar. World Value Survey and other things, but yeah. Any luck on then? Did you see something else on the Danish numbers?
in the article religion in Denmark, it said there is a category that says irreligion with a single sentence that says most people in Denmark are Christians, 79%. The rest are mainly irreligious or follow minority faiths, although many people define themselves as irreligious but spiritual.
All right, so this is a question. This is a problem. This is a social science measurement question. Are you measuring what you think you're measuring, and are you measuring it accurately? And I would be. I mean, now I'm intrigued. Although I'm worried about the time it would take for me to go online and look it up. But maybe I can put it in the description box below if we figure out what the rate of and the self-identified Christians in Denmark. The other thing too, which is worth bringing up, is this idea of being culturally Christian versus being a believing Christian. And there are perhaps many people who aren't so sure about the whole hell thing, but they go to observe Christmas with their family and Easter with their family because that's what they've always done. So there is an issue too, that just if you look at church attendance or other things, there's a reason why social scientists don't just say, are you religious, yes or no, and then go on it. They ask really a series of questions, not complicated, but they'll ask, do you attend church? Do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in a supernatural power? They'll ask a whole bunch of questions that are different elements of religiosity in order to try to better understand what people thinking, rather than just asking them, are you religious? So there's I think I'm intrigued now by Danish rates of Catholic adherence or Christian adherence.
Well, I think the problem I see is this idea that there is a default assumption of religiosity. And
Yes.
So the question isn't even asked, well, you may be culturally Christian or culturally Jewish, but do you actually believe the things that come from the pulpit? You may attend the services, you may do all the outings and all the other stuff, but do you actually believe that? And I think that's a question that needs to be asked.
True, but there is a known issue in social science research called social desirability, and that is when someone asks you a question, they're a stranger, or you over the phone, in person or over the phone. The person is also worried about their reputation, how the other person is going to perceive them. And if in a culture being an atheist is associated with being a communist and worshiping Satan or some such nonsense, then people are less likely to admit views that they perceive others might judge as socially undesirable. That is also another reason why there's some evidence that the internet provides anonymity, and in some instances with sensitive questions, you're more likely to get an accurate response than you would in a face-to-face or a telephone survey, because people don't feel judged when they give their truthful response. So these are kind of the challenges, just like when people initially started out looking at the stars, when Galileo was using the telescope and they were trying to build a better telescope and they were trying to improve the optics and look at the the lens width or the distance and how much they could see. Social scientists too need to keep improving our instruments, but the physics has 400 years head start on us, so we're only a few decades old as a discipline. But this is also part of the reason why one has to look at data and the quality of the survey and the number of people who respond and the kinds of questions that were asked, because all of this is an indicator of the quality of the data. Because as you say, people might respond for reasons, not because they're as truthful about what they really believe or not. The question is, how do we get to those authentic responses and get people to say what's really on their minds? And that's our challenge as social scientists.
I can understand that. That's why you're the social scientist and I'm just the engineer.
I'm not just the engineer, dude. You gave me a lot of great advice. I'll tell you what, I'll give you what I know. You give me what you know. We'll just do a knowledge transfer. That's a very big term. Yeah. Knowledge transfer is big. Any academics from Britain in particular will know that buzzword. Knowledge transfer.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so for everyone who's been watching the non-live Hangout, hope you enjoyed it, learned some things, and always, give comments and questions and other things in underneath the description box below. Thank you so much to Matthew for showing up. Otherwise, I would have been by myself today. So thank you for coming.
Well, all the pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes, and we can, I guess, off-air talk about dates for May, because one of the benefits of coming to the Hangout is that you get to help me decide, or at least tell me when you're available for the next Hangout to help me make the decision when it should be held. But I'm going to hit stop broadcasting now so we can have that discussion off-air. For everyone else, I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you like a video, share it. I would very much appreciate it. You could do that little thing for me. It would make my day. And tell me that you did it, and then I will tell you how much you made my day. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Bye.